At 240 hours on July 11th, 9 miles off the coast of Oman, a missile targets a commercial vessel. The radar operators expect a strike aimed at a warship. The missile tears instead into the stern of the MV GFS Galaxy, a Cyprus-flagged, UAE-owned container ship carrying no weapons and no soldiers. Fire climbs the deck. 23 crew scramble into lifeboats. One man, the third engineer, an Indian national, never makes it out of the engine room. That strike occurs just days after a ceasefire that held for barely 3 weeks collapsed. And within 72 hours, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the most contested stretch of saltwater on the planet. The IRGC Navy disables a commercial vessel. The U.S. Navy answers with waves of retaliatory strikes across 140 coastal military sites. Then Washington reinstates a full blockade on every Iranian port. The question that hangs over the entire operation is simple. How does a fleet of billion-dollar warships get pushed to the edge by an adversary firing cheap, disposable weapons? Rewind to February 28, 2026. Coalition forces launch Operation Epic Fury, a campaign built to dismantle Iran's military apparatus piece by piece. By April, the fighting stalls. On June 17th, under a peace memorandum brokered in Islamabad, the warring sides agree to a fragile pause and reopen maritime transit through the strait. Commerce resumes. Tankers move. For roughly 3 weeks, the waterway breathes. That calm had already shattered days earlier when the ceasefire collapsed, and the strike on the GFS Galaxy pushed the conflict into open escalation. The Oman Navy reached the survivors first, and a towing team later pulled the burning hull toward the UAE. They pulled 23 survivors from the water and begin a joint search and rescue sweep for the missing engineer. The vessel drifts, ablaze, a civilian ship caught in a fight it never joined. Initial reports confuse the target for a U.S. warship, which sharpens the danger of miscalculation. It carries no naval crew. It flies no American flag. And that distinction matters, because the strike on a neutral merchant ship gives Washington the justification it needs to escalate without hesitation. The response arrives fast. At 19:15 hours Eastern Time, U.S. Central Command opens its third wave of the week. Fighter aircraft and naval warships hit more than 140 targets clustered near the strait in a single night. Coastal radars, missile batteries, naval staging points. An analysis by OSINT researchers tracking the strikes confirms a 7-hour bombardment of Iranian coastal defenses on July 14th. Iranian media reports explosions rolling through Bandar Abbas and across Qeshm Island. The strikes are surgical intent, but the sheer volume signals something larger. This is no warning shot. Then President Trump moves to strangle the economics of the conflict. On July 14th, he formally reinstates the naval blockade on all Iranian ports. 20 U.S. Navy warships fan out across the Middle East to enforce it and secure the shipping lanes. Washington estimates the closure drains $500 million from the Iranian economy every day. The math is deliberate. Cut the ports, and you cut the revenue that funds the fast attack boats and missile launchers. But a blockade only works if you can hold the water it depends on, and that water carries a fifth of the world's energy. Before we dive into the engineering behind this crisis, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our breakdowns of the conflicts reshaping the world. Your support keeps this analysis coming. The Strait of Hormuz is a choke point no map can widen. Roughly 20% of global oil and gas exports pass through it, funneled into a shipping lane narrow enough to feel the pressure of every missile fired near it. When the ceasefire breaks, the bottleneck slams shut. On July 12th, only 11 commercial ships complete the crossing, down from a normal flow of more than 30. Traffic nearly halves overnight. To keep energy moving, coalition forces reroute merchant vessels along the southern corridor off Oman, holding a thin, tightly guarded stream of tankers on the water. The supply survives, barely. Here is where the engineering paradox comes into focus. The IRGC does not need a modern navy to threaten one. It deploys low-cost supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles and unmanned sea drones in coordinated bursts, each one designed to saturate the air defense network of a U.S. warship. Think of it like a fire alarm. One alarm, you respond calmly. 50 alarms ringing at once, you struggle to find the real fire. The swarm floods the radar picture, forcing the crew to sort genuine threats from decoys in seconds, while the clock burns down. The defense against that flood is the Aegis combat system, the digital brain wired into Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. Paired with the SPY-1 radar array, Aegis scans the sky, sorts hundreds of contacts, and assigns priorities faster than any human team could. When a supersonic missile crosses the threat line, the ship fires SM-2 interceptors, and the incoming projectile is neutralized in the space of a heartbeat. According to a declassified assessment referenced by Uzni News, these systems perform as designed under saturation. The interceptors work. The radar works. The problem is not accuracy. The problem is arithmetic. The fighting intensifies on July 14th. IRGC naval units and U.S. forces exchange heavy standoff fire across the region, where the engagement relies on advanced missiles and drones. Steel against steel, at ranges measured in hundreds of miles. And Tehran does not confine the fight to the water. The IRGC launches a joint drone and missile operation reaching across the region, striking U.S. assets far from the coast. The strikes damage MQ-9 Reaper drones at Ali al-Salam Air Base in Kuwait and hit Sheikh Issa Air Base in Bahrain. The message is that no forward base sits safely out of range. Those Reapers matter more than their price tags suggest. The MQ-9 is the eyes of the Fleet, a medium-altitude surveillance platform that feeds targeting data back to the ships and command centers. Damage the Reapers, and you blind a piece of the network before the shooting even starts. But the U.S. retains overlapping sensors, and the blockade holds. 20 warships kept the port sealed. The counterstrikes continue. Each side probes for the seam in the other's defenses, and neither finds a clean break, which pushes the confrontation into a grinding contest of endurance. The economic shock ripples outward within hours. Additional war risk premiums, the surcharge a shipowner pays to sail through a danger zone, jumps to 5% of a vessel's total value after the ceasefire collapses. Before the conflict began in February, that same premium sat at 0.15%. A tanker worth $100 million now carries a $5 million surcharge just to enter the strait. Global energy prices, already climbing since February, sit 24% higher on the disruption. That pressure lands directly on Gulf economies whose entire prosperity flows through this water. So the Gulf monarchs pick up the phone. Facing a commodity shock and a war on their doorstep, they press Washington for security guarantees and push back hard on a proposal already circulating. Trump had floated a 20% transit toll on ships crossing the strait, a fee that would have piled onto already surging costs. After urgent calls from Gulf leaders on July 14th, he drops the toll entirely, replacing it with direct investment from the Gulf states into the United States. The allies get their assurances, the fee vanishes, and the coalition trades a short-term revenue grab for the long-term loyalty it needs to keep the blockade legitimate. Now the open question comes due, the one raised the moment that missiles struck the galaxy. Why do the world's most advanced warships struggle against weapons that cost a fraction of what it takes to stop them? The answer sits in the magazine. Every SM-2 interceptor a destroyer carries occupies a fixed launch cell, and a ship sails with a finite number of them. During a single multi-domain swarm attack, modern destroyers exhaust up to half of their onboard interceptors. Half the magazine, gone in one engagement. That is the vulnerability no amount of radar sophistication solves. The IRGC fires missiles and drones that cost a sliver of a single interceptor, and it fires them in volume. The destroyer wins every individual exchange and still loses the math, because you cannot trade a limited stock of costly interceptors against an effectively unlimited stock of cheap attackers and come out ahead. A ship that empties half its magazine repelling one swarm has to break contact, sail hundreds of miles to a resupply port, and leave a gap in the line. The engineering is sound. The economics are brutal. Naval strategists read that lesson in real time. The fix is not a better missile. It is a different tool. Planners now prioritize sea drones of their own and advanced electronic warfare systems, machines that jam guidance signals, spoof sensors, and confuse incoming missiles without firing a single interceptor. Electronic warfare turns the swarm against itself, scrambling the coordinates a missile needs to find its target. Met cheap with cheap. Answer the drone with a drone. The goal is to neutralize the threat while keeping the expensive magazine full for the moment that truly demands it. A word of caution on the wider picture. Despite claims that Iran's fleet was completely annihilated earlier in the campaign, the IRGC Navy's decentralized assets remain operational where it counts. It still fields numerous small fast-attack craft, coastal missile launchers, and drone systems, the exact tools built to exploit the magazine problem. The force that struck the galaxy and clashed with U.S. forces in the strait is not a remnant. It is a purpose-built swarm navy, designed from the ground up to make a superpower spend a fortune defending against pennies, which brings the entire confrontation into focus. The Strait of Hormuz is not decided by the largest ship or the longest-range missile. It is decided by who can sustain the fight without running dry. A single missile disables a civilian ship and pulls 20 warships into a blockade. Cheap drones force billion-dollar destroyers to burn through half their defenses in minutes. And a proposed toll collapses under a few phone calls from allies who hold the real leverage. The strongest navy on Earth is being drained, one interceptor at a time. That is the lesson written across the water this week. And every naval planner watching Hormuz already knows it defines the next decade of war at sea.